It's official. The Jets are facing Aaron Rodgers in week one, and their best game plan can be summed up in one word: attack. Let's break it down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, June 6th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, it is now official. Aaron Rodgers is joining the Pittsburgh Steelers on a one-year contract. Of course, Rodgers spent the 2023 and 2024 seasons as the Jets quarterback, although 2023 he was injured for all but 4 snaps. Rodgers departed the Jets early this offseason, and over the last couple of months, it's been a big will they, won't they between Rodgers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, Rodgers is joining the Steelers, and this is actually pretty significant news for the New York Jets. Normally this would kind of be a side note to be, a former Jets player joins another team, but it's significant for the Jets because the Pittsburgh Steelers are the Jets' Week 1 opponent this year. So the Jets will begin their regular season in 2025 by facing Aaron Rodgers. Now, on today's show, I felt like this is a good time to look at what a good game plan could look like for the Jets Week 1. We'll talk about how important coaching will be in making sure the Jets avoid the big mistake. We'll talk about why the Jets might want to deviate from their normal style on offense, but we'll start by talking about how they should stick with their normal style on defense. And it's, the expression normal style is a bit misleading right now because you have a new coaching staff implementing a new system on both sides of the ball. But as we know, Aaron Glenn is coming in and implementing a new defense, and the Jets are changing their style from the Robert Saleh, Jeff Ulbrich defense. Saleh and Ulbrich were a defense that ran a defense that rushed for a lot, played a lot of zone. Glenn's going to run a defense that blitzes a lot and plays a lot of man-to-man. And I think in many ways, the Glenn style defense might be better for a week 1 game against a Aaron Rodgers-led Steelers offense for a couple of reasons. Now, Rodgers is going to present some interesting challenges for the Jets because he's very, very familiar with the Jets personnel on defense. Of course, we have some new faces on the defensive side of the ball, but most of the players are back from last year, and he spent last year competing against them every day in practice. So Rodgers has had the opportunity to kind of pick up tendencies on guys who used to be his teammates, and he understands kind of how to attack them. Rodgers also, to a lesser extent, knows how to compete against the Aaron Glenn defense. It's going back 3 years, but Rodgers did spend a couple of years in Green Bay when Glenn was Detroit's defensive coordinator, so it's not going to be the first time he goes up against Aaron Glenn. And it's a bit challenging implementing a new defense the style Aaron Glenn runs because it's kind of a complex type of defense. The Robert Saleh, Jeff Ulbrich defense, I don't want to say there's any defense that's simple in the NFL, but they've discussed extensively how they believe that keeping things as simple as possible for their players, at least to the extent it's possible in the NFL, is a good thing because it allows guys to think, to play rather than think. It allows them to play fast. The Glenn defense is much more complex. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge to implement. And I think in some ways, getting Aaron Rodgers week 1 might be a positive thing because you have a lot of extra time to prepare for your week 1 opponent. I'm not going to say you spend all of training camp getting ready for your week 1 opponent because training camp's really about implementing the core plays on your offense and your defense, but you have extra time in a way you don't for the rest of the regular season because you can start implementing your week 1 game plan weeks in advance. And for a complex style defense like Aaron Glenn's going to run, I think that could be a benefit against the ultimate veteran quarterback in Aaron Rodgers because while Aaron Rodgers certainly has seen some physical deterioration to his play, he's still a very mentally sharp quarterback. And it's a bit of a challenge going up against him, especially if you're running a new defense that the guys aren't that comfortable yet in the concepts. A new defense, you could see breakdowns, you could see guys ending up taking the wrong assignments just because they're not familiar with their roles. But what you can do for the Pittsburgh game, you can just kind of really focus on practicing the concepts you're going to run. Because Aaron Rodgers is going to be the toughest quarterback in the league to try and fool. Because he's going to study, he's going to study all of Aaron Glenn's old tendencies with Detroit. He already knows the tendencies for the Jets defensive players. But now you can really think about, you can study yourself. Glenn can study what he did in Detroit, especially in those games against Green Bay and Rodgers. And he can make sure he breaks his tendencies. And he can only implement stuff that he knows Rodgers hasn't seen before. And that could be an advantage. But I also think an Aaron Glenn style defense could give this Pittsburgh offense with Rodgers some troubles, especially in their first game. Now, last year, Rodgers struggled against the blitz, and Rodgers usually dominates the blitz, but against the blitz last year, his passer rating was under 90. And that's the first time he was under 90 as a passer against the blitz in close to 9 years. There was a stretch during his prime in Green Bay where they had some offensive line struggles where he didn't really, he had a stretch where he went into a slump. But usually Rodgers dominated the blitz. Now, you could say that maybe that's a small sample size that you didn't do so well against the blitz last year. You could also say that, overall his overall level of play declined last year. So maybe that's just a result of Rodgers overall, not being as good. If every part of Rodgers' game declines, surely his play against the blitz will decline. But I would argue a lot of it is just a factor of his loss of mobility, which happens to quarterbacks as, they get into their 40s. And I think that there's another factor at play here is that while there's always a danger if you throw a lot of complex defensive concepts, it'll confuse your guys. It can also confuse the other team's offense. And Rodgers is going to be with a new offensive line who will have to get used to his cadences. And you remember last year, the Jets had some issues with Rodgers' cadences. There were, especially early in the season, there were lots of false starts because players weren't used to Rodgers' cadences. He's also trying to kind of develop chemistry with his blockers. And on top of that, he's trying to develop chemistry with his recievers. And he has to learn how to work with a new offensive coordinator, because in Pittsburgh, he's not going to have Nathaniel Hackett, who's a guy whose entire philosophy on the offense was, well, I don't really have to do anything. It's all going to be Aaron making adjustments at the line of scrimmage. Now he's with the new offensive coordinator. And in Pittsburgh last year, there were lots of reports that they weren't really happy when Russell Wilson freelanced, whereas Aaron Rodgers is a guy who wants to be in total control of the offense. So, if it works out for Pittsburgh, it could take a while because there are lots of things that have to be sorted out. And it's an opportunity to kind of disrupt this offense in the early stages with an offensive line that's getting used to blocking for a different type of quarterback. Throwing different looks at them could really confuse them, and perhaps you get some breakdowns up front. And I think the Jets also need to attack. When I say the Jets need to attack, and I think that's what they need to do. I think heavy blitz look, could produce good results in week one. I think they also need to be aggressive in their coverages. I think that you should see an awful lot of press man coverage. And I'm thinking about Sauce Gardner versus DK Metcalf, because Rodgers has to get used to throwing to a new set of receivers. And we know that Rodgers likes specific timing routes. He likes very precise routes. So you want to get up in DK Metcalf's face where he's not used to playing with Rodgers and try and disrupt his timing. Sauce Gardner is the type of corner who's going to really excel in press coverage, playing a physical type of coverage. And the idea behind press coverage is that you hit a guy within the first 5 yards. In the NFL, it's legal to touch a receiver as a corner within the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And what you're trying to do is throw off his timing so he doesn't get to the spot he needs to on time, which is a critical part of any NFL offense, but especially an offense run by Aaron Rodgers. So I think that there's a real opportunity for the Jets. I think in many ways the Jets defense stylistically fits well. It matches up well against the type of offense Pittsburgh's going to running, especially an offense that will have challenges early in the season. So I think for the Jets on defense, this is game one of the Aaron Glenn defense. You want to run an Aaron Glenn style defense. On the offensive side of the ball, I think the Jets are going to need to be a little counterintuitive, though, when they face the Pittsburgh Steelers week one, because I think for the most part this coming season, Jets are going to be a run-first team. But against this specific opponent week one, Jets may need to mix it up a little. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. You can stop managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery. So now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner will be smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Aaron Rodgers has decided to join the Pittsburgh Steelers, and normally that would just be an afterthought about an ex-member of the New York Jets, but it's pretty relevant for the 2025 Jets because week one, the Jets play the Pittsburgh Steelers, who will now be quarterbacked by Aaron Rodgers. And it's never too early to think about the first game. So with Rodgers in the news, seemed like a good day to discuss an early game plan 3 months before the start of the season. What's the optimal game plan for the New York Jets against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Now, in the first segment, I talked about the defensive side of the ball. And I think what will become the Jets' normal style this year, heavy blitz, lots of man-to-man aggressive coverage, could create problems for the Pittsburgh Steelers on offense. When you flip the sides of the ball, though, with the Jets on offense and the Steelers on defense, I think the Jets actually might want to get away in week one from what they normally do. I think that this Jets offense is going to be one of the league leaders in rushing attempts this season because you have Justin Fields at quarterback. You have what on paper looks like a pretty talented group of running backs, and you have a passing game where you only have one good wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, and you have a quarterback who's at this point probably a more accomplished runner than a thrower. So this is going to be a Jets team that I've put the number. I want to see the Jets team rush for at least 2,600 yards this year. But I think the Steelers are the type of team where the Jets may have to be a little counterintuitive because last year Pittsburgh was one of the best run defenses in the league. They were a very difficult team to run the ball against. And Mike Tomlin in recent years has used a lot of one deep safety coverages. And the reason that's significant is that you can either run a coverage with one deep safety or two deep safeties. Well, if you only have one safety deep, that means that second safety is playing close to the line of scrimmage. That means it's the extra safeties in the box. That means you're kind of looking to stop the run. So I think that, the Jets could be playing into Pittsburgh's hands a little bit if they came out and ran the ball extensively early. Because what happens when you go against a team that's very good against stopping the run, if you run the ball twice, then you're in third and long. And that's the type of situation the defense wants to be in. I think this Jets offense in this week one game might want to go out and be aggressive and try and throw the ball early in the field. Because again, the Steelers already have a good run defense. The Steelers already put that extra safety in the box a lot. They're going to be expecting the run. And that's the type of thing that can open up opportunities in the passing game. If you're really loading up to stop the run, it makes the passing game simpler. But that also means that one of the things and this is going to be a consistent theme on this podcast in the months ahead, offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand needs to figure out ways to free up Garrett Wilson. Wilson is the Jets' number one receiver. In fact, he's the only guy on this team right now who you can say is a quality starter. And I would say Garrett Wilson's better than a quality starter. I don't want to sell Garrett short, but we don't know who the number two receiver is going to be on this team. It could be Josh Reynolds. It could be Alan Lazard. It could be Arian Smith. Maybe somebody else, maybe a Malachi Corley or Xavier Gipson surprises us with a contribution in training camp. It looks vastly improved, but I think we can say that Garrett Wilson's going to see a heavy target share. Steelers have a decent number one quarter in Joey Porter Jr. And the way Pittsburgh's typically used Porter through the early years of his career is they will have him shadow the other team's best receiver for select matchups. They won't do it every week. There are two different ways you can use your corners. You can either have him shadow you can have your number one guy follow the other team's best receiver no matter where he is on the field. So if he goes left, your number one corner goes left with him, goes right, number one corner goes left, goes right with him. Or you can just say this corner's on the left, this corner's on the right side, pick up whoever comes to you. Pittsburgh kind of used a hybrid approach where in certain games they'll have Porter shadow the other team's best receiver. And I would imagine week one's going to be a shadow game because Garrett Wilson is, really the Jets' only threat. So and I think that like for teams that kind of use that hybrid approach, Garrett's going to draw the number one coverage on most weeks because Jets don't really have a number two receiver who can hurt you until somebody proves that they can. And Garrett's capable of beating coverages. And, I've talked about this week on the podcast that frequently, people say, well, you just double team the other team's number one receiver. It's easier said than done. Sometimes those lead to unfavorable matchups because if you're double teaming, you're usually double teaming with a corner and a safety. And then when you get to the safety part of it, it's a wide receiver against the safety, which really favors the offense. But if you have a good number one corner, that's the type of thing that you can have him follow the other team's best receiver. That's actually a better approach than trying to double team the other team's top guy. Now, Garrett Wilson's an excellent receiver. He's certainly capable of getting numbers against Joey Porter Jr., but you don't want to rely all on a player's talent when you don't have to. You want to make sure you're using a scheme to put guys in as favorable a position as possible. And that means getting Garrett in motion so that he gets a free release off the line of scrimmage. You can't really jam a guy if he's running in motion. Use Garrett in the slot so he has the whole field to work with. Garrett's an excellent route runner. We've seen him execute at a high level out of the slot, and that's pretty easy to understand. Again, he's a really good route runner. And when you're a good route runner, working in the slot gives you so much more space to work because when you're on the outside, you kind of pin to the sidelines. There's one direction you can't go. If you're on the outside, the sideline's right behind you, either to your left or to your right. So you're more limited in where you can run. Whereas if you're in the middle of the field, you can go left, you can go right, you can go up the field, you can sell a route up the field and come back. It's easier to work out of the slot. And without like an actual certified slot receiver on this team, I think Garrett Wilson should see a fair share of snaps in the slot. And then being creative, making sure you design ways to get him touches. They think these are all things that are very important for the New York Jets. It'll be important throughout the season. And I think this week one matchup, that's what will be important, especially in a game where I do think the Jets will be well advised to come out throwing the football. And there's one other thing that the Jets are going to have to do on offense in this game, and that's help out Armand Membou. Armand Membou's first NFL game is going to be the biggest challenge you could possibly get in your first game because he's going to be going one-on-one against TJ Watt. And Watt usually lines up against the right tackle. There are lots of teams that move their best defender around. Sometimes Kansas City with Chris Jones, who plays a different position than TJ Watt, but on passing downs, Kansas City just kind of lets Chris Jones pick his matchup. They just say, Chris, go find the weakest offensive lineman that you can dominate and go line up against him. And that's what they do. TJ Watt usually lines up against the right tackle. Pittsburgh's not very creative in using him. Maybe Watt just likes it that way. I don't know. But I don't know that you want to put a rookie one-on-one, even one who's really talented like Armand Membou. I don't think you want to leave him one-on-one against TJ Watt. Last year in October, the Jets played a Sunday night game against Pittsburgh, which was a disaster. Jets dominated the first 29 minutes and then completely fell apart. But one of the few things that was positive for the Jets in that game was the way they dealt with TJ Watt. Because if you watch that game, if you go back and watch the film, on practically every play, Watt was being double teamed. And so the Jets just did not let Watt beat them in that game. The Jets lost. Jets let a lot of other guys beat them. It was a miserable performance. It was a horrible game to watch. But the Jets actually did a really good job neutralizing TJ Watt, and that's the type of mindset you need heading in. And look, as I said with Garrett Wilson, easier said than done. Double teaming a great player. Watt's still probably going to produce even if you double team him on every snap, but I don't understand why more teams don't try and disrupt a guy like TJ Watt. I don't understand why they leave him one-on-one. He certainly can't leave him one-on-one frequently against Armand Membou because I like Armand Membou. I think he's going to be very talented. I think he's going to have a good career. But I think if you leave him one-on-one against TJ Watt, it could be a long day in week one. So that's got to be one of the key focuses for the New York Jets in that game. And you're on Locked On Jets podcast. There's one last thing that I think the Jets are going to need to do both in week one and through the season. And that's not giving the opponent any help. It's a critical component of winning football games. And it may sound obvious, but you see a lot of teams give games away. How do the Jets avoid it? Well, I'll talk about that as we continue here on this on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. The Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. It's never too early to start thinking about week one. We're kind of in the quiet point of the offseason, and then news broke yesterday that the Steelers are signing Aaron Rodgers officially. So it felt like a good time to think in advance about what the Jets' game plan against the Pittsburgh Steelers week 1 might be. So we've talked about how the Jets might want to approach things on defense and how they might want to approach things on offense. But I think there's also a bigger element at play here. And I think this is something that's going to be very important for the Jets throughout the course of the 2025 season. I think, many weeks the Jets are going to be the less talented of the two teams on the field. And I don't think the Jets are going to be totally mismatched the way they were in, the Todd Bowles era or the Adam Gase era, Mike McCagnon, John Idzik. Those were Jets teams that took the field and had no shot most weeks. The talent gap will be smaller. And this is a team that actually does have legitimate talent on it, but most weeks the other teams will have a little bit more talent. And there's a way you can make up for a small talent difference in the NFL. And it's as simple as just not beating yourself. The last two dynasties in the NFL, Kansas City Chiefs, New England Patriots, they won a lot of close games, especially like big games. And once you get to January in the playoffs, and people frequently complain, how do they get so lucky? How do they always get these fortunate bounces in close games? Why do they always win these big games? Why is it the other team that always makes the mistake? That last question is the key point. You see sometimes the Kansas City Chiefs lose in the playoffs because they just get outplayed. And the same was true for the Patriots during the Brady Belichick era. You think about why those teams won games. Well, obviously great quarterbacks, Mahomes in Kansas City, Brady in New England. Great coaching, Andy Reid in Kansas City, Belichick in New England. And when you think about great coaching, when you think about Andy Reid's offensive schemes, Belichick's defensive schemes, but there are also deeper elements to this. There's a real focus on the fundamentals. And that's, just like little things about making sure guys are protecting the football when they're carrying it, dedicating extra practice time to special teams. The Chiefs have had one of the best special teams coaches in the league through the Andy Reid era. Belichick himself is a former special teams coach. These are like the little things that make a big difference. And like I said, there have been games where the Chiefs have been outplayed in the playoffs. Like the Eagles annihilated the Chiefs in the Super Bowl this last year. The Buccaneers destroyed the Chiefs in the Super Bowl in the 2021 season. But you very rarely see the Chiefs lose because they make a dumb play. Sometimes you're outplayed, but you don't give the game away. The only time in like the Reid era, the Reid Mahomes era, where I can remember the Chiefs feeling like the Chiefs really let one get away was the AFC Championship game in 2021 against the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of close wins, a lot of games where the other team gave the game away, but you very rarely see the Chiefs give the game away. And the same was true of the Patriots during the Brady Belichick era. And of course, you're a Jets fan. You're probably frustrated because felt like every single time there was a close game in the Brady Belichick era, the Patriots would find a way to win. And a lot of that time, it was because Brady was making a clutch play down the stretch. But again, it was also because the other team sometimes made big mistakes. The Super Bowl against the Falcons, where the Falcons, despite blowing a big lead, were on the verge of icing the game. And then they throw the ball twice and take a penalty to knock themselves out of field goal range. Just like things like that. When the Patriots lost a couple AFC Championship games because Peyton Manning outdueled Brady. They lost a Super Bowl on a miracle catch to the Tyree play. They lost another Super Bowl because Eli Manning drove the Giants down the field. There was another one where Nick Foles had the game of his life and actually outdueled Brady. But you didn't see the Patriots fumble the ball away, because somebody was being careless with the ball. You very rarely saw something like that. And the Jets are not going to be like the Mahomes Chiefs or the Brady Patriots this year, but there's a bigger point to be made. And that's, in order to overcome a talent deficit, don't be the team that's play sloppy. About a week and a half ago, offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand talked about what he's looking for in his offense. And we discussed that a little bit. And there was an awful lot of coach speak, a lot of boilerplate generic stuff Tanner Engstrand mentioned. But he talked about an attention to detail. He talked about the fundamentals. And I do think that there is a way to make up for the talent gap, at least to an extent. Talent will ultimately win in the NFL. But a small talent gap can be overcome by guys focusing on the fundamentals. And that starts at practice. That starts with making sure guys are just using the best technique to avoid those big mistakes. And it also goes to special teams, an area that a lot of coaches overlook. And I talk about special teams a lot because you look at the great teams in the league, most of them have really good special teams. Kansas City's always had elite special teams during the Reed Mahomes era. Baltimore, John Harbaugh was a special teams coach. Again, the Patriots dynasty, how many games did Adam Vinatieri win for the Patriots? These are the little things. And in a league where, again, half the games are decided by one score or less. You could look at the Jets last year. Jets were a terrible team, 5-12. Over half their games were decided by one score or less. Jets had a bad record in those games. And there are lots of reasons for that. But one of them goes back to coaching, where the Jets just were not taking care of the little things. And this is going to be true of the Jets when they play the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's going to be true of the Jets throughout the 2025 season. This is going to be a team with very low expectations. Fully expect them to be underdog. They're underdogs right now, according to our friends at FanDuel. They'll be underdogs heading into that game, even though they will be at home. And Jets will be underdogs an awful lot this year. But you can overcome that by being the team that executes better. There's talent and there's execution. Last year, I think the Jets were a little overrated talent-wise because they had a lot of older guys that didn't perform up to the level people were expecting them to perform at. But it's clear that the execution was not very good. And a lot of that just goes back to a lot of the fundamentals lacking on that team. This year, you can make up for a talent gap at least to an extent by being the smart team with the football. Don't be the team that commits the big turnover. Don't be the team that commits the dumb penalty. That's been a Jet special through the years, committing the dumb penalty at the worst possible time. And be the team that executes on special teams. And a lot of this, again, a lot of this is the stuff that's kind of under the surface. In the NFL, we talk about coaching a lot as though everything a coach does is visible. But the reality is most of coaching is kind of like an iceberg. You ever hear the expression it's something like an iceberg? Because you ever go out to sea and see an iceberg, you see maybe a small sheet of ice, but underneath the water, underneath the surface, there's a much bigger sheet of ice. And a lot of the stuff that we see on game day is the result of the stuff that's behind the scenes. It's about how a team prepared in practice. And I think in order for the Jets to surprise us this year, it'll have to be due to a lot of the little things we don't see. And that will begin week 1 when the Jets take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll chat again next time. Can't wait.